Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly panel. My name is Sophie Barron, founder and CEO of The Conversationalist, and I could not be more excited for tonight's conversation. We have so much to cover in such little time, so I wanted to share a little bit about The Conversationalist before we get going. But thank you all so much for being here. We see so many awesome faces. Hey, Basha. Hey, Bianca. Hey, Laura, Rena, we're so excited for tonight's conversation. And before we jump in, a little bit about The Conversationalist. We are on a mission to unify the world. The Conversationalist is the go-to destination to amplify Gen Z voices, and we could not be more grateful for each and every one of you for being a part of our mission. And tonight, we're covering some difficult subject matter as we dive into the topics of gun violence and gun violence prevention. So with that in mind, we know that gun violence can affect people at multiple levels. So when in doubt, please check out some resources that we've shared, and you can find resources that will impact your mental health positively, as we know gun violence can be a tricky topic to talk about. And with that said, we want to make sure that tonight our intention as we go into this conversation is to grow and learn and better understand one another's perspectives. And the ultimate goal tonight is not to change anyone else's mind, but rather to amplify our voices, share our opinions without fear of judgment, and begin to unify the world. So thank you all so much for being here, and make sure that after this conversation, you join our community on Geneva to continue the conversation. We have so many awesome conversations planned for you, especially our after party tonight, where we're going to speak with each of the panelists in depth about their experience tonight and anything we didn't have a chance to cover on the panel. So just text the word unify to 877-222-1119, and we can't wait to see you there. So without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome tonight's featured panelists for our discussion and our distinguished celebrity guest host. So first and foremost, I want you to meet our fantastic panelists. So first, we have Noah Howard, we have Leora Green, we have Bella DeLacio, we have Joshua Turner, we have Abigail Layden, we have Reagan McGuire, we have Zeb Harshbarger, and we have Zaire Turner. And we're so excited that all of you are here. Thank you so much for being here tonight to talk about this important subject. And without further ado, I want to bring in our celebrity guest host for the evening. I am so humbled and honored to introduce our celebrity guest host for the evening and my best friend, Reed Alexander. Reed is a reporter at Business Insider who is passionate about mental health and pushing conversations forward. Reed, as I mentioned, is a journalist where nowadays he spends most of his time covering the biggest banks and asset managers that control trillions of dollars on Wall Street, and has done extensive work in the gun violence prevention space. And we could not be more excited to have him here with us tonight. So without further ado, we welcome Reed Alexander to The Conversationalist.
Good evening, everybody. So nice to see you, Sophie. Thank you for that really terrific introduction. It's great to be here with you. And as someone who has seen The Conversationalist from, I think, the very first day that it was born, I am so proud of all the growth and to be able to moderate tonight's discussion. And it's really a delight to see all of the panelists. I think this is such an important topic, and let me explain to you why. So, as many people who are watching this may be aware, as we've been, heavily promoting this and talking about it, and very excited to be doing this event. I was Nevel on iCarly for 7 great years. But what a lot of people don't know is that during the time that I was on that show, I was incredibly passionate about another kind of storytelling, and that was journalistic storytelling as a reporter, covering news, covering world events, covering people and what makes them tick. As you said today, I have the really great honor of being a reporter and journalist at Business Insider, where I cover Wall Street, finance and financial institutions, banks, asset managers, and some of the people that power those organizations. But I've also had the chance to report extensively on gun violence prevention and gun violence in America, particularly with a focus on school shootings. I've spent a lot of time in communities that have been affected by school shootings and violence, especially the Parkland community. People watching this will remember 2 years ago in 2018, there was a shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, most severe and most lethal shooting at a public high school in American history, resulted in 17 deaths. And that community may very well never be the same. But I spent weeks and weeks on end there earlier this year to kind of go back and profile the stories of 6 teachers who lived through the shooting and their students and how they've been coping with their mental health ever since. And I covered that story from the very first day, which was Valentine's Day of 2018. So I know what the effects of gun violence can look like in communities that try and rebuild. Now, we're having this conversation at a precipitous time in American history. There are exigent events happening. There's a pandemic going on that have unleashed trauma and emotion and high stakes in our country, particularly as we close in with just a few weeks to go till the presidential election. America's destiny is something that is constantly being debated in various quarters and by people who study social policy and by ordinary Americans all over this country. And it is inexorably tied to our safety. And gun violence is an issue that's very much called that into question in recent years. So we thought, what better way to figure out how to solve this problem than by turning to our young people, which is why we've assembled this terrific panel that you see on screen. 4 people on the left, 4 people on the right. A diverse array of opinions. This is a bipartisan and civil conversation. We are proving that, yes, we can have serious conversations about politics in this country in a respectful way. And I, a nonpartisan moderator, helping to facilitate the flow of the discussion. Now, before we dive in, I just want to set the scene with a couple of interesting details and statistics that I thought people might find useful as sort of a primer for context of this conversation. According to the Pew Research Center, 60% of Americans say that gun laws should be tougher. That's up from 57% last year and 52% in 2017. 3 in 10 adults, that's 30%, roughly a third, say they own a gun. 11% say they know somebody who does. So according to the Pew Research Center, many of us know people that either have firearms or you may have one yourself. Why do people have guns in this country? Well, 2/3 of them say it's for personal protection. That's a major reason that they have a gun. And there are some rare areas of bipartisan consensus on this, including that 92% of Republicans and right-leaning independents and 91% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, so that's slightly more than 9 in 10 Americans, say they do not believe it's a good idea for people who have diagnosed mental illnesses to be able to buy a firearm. And significant numbers on both sides, 93% of Democrats and 82% of Republicans, believe that we should be imposing background checks for private gun sales. So knowing all of that information, now you know that there are some very strong feelings about this and that Americans on both sides of the aisle are saying, how are we going to protect one another, our friends, family, loved ones, ourselves, and what do we need to do to get this right? Well, Gen Z has bright ideas. So tonight we are turning to them. We've got questions set up for people on both sides of the aisle, and I want to dive right in. Joshua Turner, let's start with you. I wonder, Joshua, if you could tell us about the kinds of direct experiences that you may have had in your life, which have illustrated for you the impacts and significance of gun violence, whether at school, through a friend, or your personal life. Tell us about some of those experiences and how they've affected you.
Yes, first and foremost, I want to thank everyone here for having me on today. Super kudos today to the Conversationalist for finally hitting 10K. I'm really excited about the growth and development of this organization and of this community, pushing another way for young people to be able to have a really strong voice on important topics to us, no matter what side of the fence we stand on. So just to answer your question, gun violence is something I'm very familiar with as me growing up in Baltimore City. I've worked in both gun violence prevention as well on the ground level in terms of walking around the community, as well as worked in the higher up levels, working with different orgs and trying to find different root cause solutions. And the one thing I can tell you all across the board, especially when it comes down to gun violence that plagues the African-American community at unalarmed rates, is that it's a fight for survival. I remember growing up and hearing that my brother himself was shot and killed as a result of gun violence, as a result of him fighting to survive. And in reality, the gun violence that we see inside of Black communities is far different than any form of mass shooting that has happened in communities that don't look like ours. Gun violence in our communities are promoted by in my opinion, I would say 3 things. 1, scarcity. 2, institutionalized racism. And 3, it's also pushed and promoted by layers upon layers of complex trauma that are all interrelated to the other things that I just mentioned. So when you look at a lot of the areas where gun violence is happening, particularly in Baltimore City, Baltimore City is known as the birthplace of redlining. In addition to that, a lot of our heavily redlined areas are now known as microzones. Those microzones have high levels and high rates of gun violence, where we have more than 10 homicides a year in the same exact area, giving us an overwhelming gun homicide rate of over 300 homicides, and most of them being Black. And these numbers will continue to increase every year. And the reason being is because the longstanding issues of racism have not been addressed, and its spillover effect in terms of how it has pervaded everything as simple as our economic system within this country, and how it maximizes scarcity within our communities has not been addressed, which continues to lead over into the bleed that happens inside of Black communities. Now,
So
I'm not saying.
you say, I'm sorry to interrupt, you say that you
Mhm.
lost your brother directly to this. So
Yes,
I
I
just
have.
wonder, how has your family tried to rebuild? And I'm so sorry for your loss, but what does the rebuilding process look like within the family for you? That's, an unbearable tragedy to endure.
Yeah, on my mother's side of the family, I'm actually the only child. On my father's side of the family, I have siblings, and I watched how that tore them apart. My father now is slow to speak in conversation. He has never been the same since. Never been the same. It shattered him. I think it's something about when you lose your firstborn son.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
every parent loves their child equally. But it's something special about your firstborn, where you expect him to be the first to do everything, as well as for the first to be able to pave the way for the people coming behind him, his siblings.
Hmm.
And his life was sadly cut short as a result of gun violence. Now, I myself, I can never say that I can be mad at the shooter. I can be mad at the shooter who was trying to survive in a country that was never designed for him to survive. I cannot be mad at someone who's fighting for a very means to survive when primary labor markets have been isolated and have shut out Black people for years since our very coming to this country. I can't be mad at a young man who has been traumatized by systemic abuse, has been traumatized directly by outright, as well as systemic racism that continues to pervade and worsen the Black condition within this society. I can't be mad at a young man who has been subject to a system whose primary manifest function is the destruction of the Black body. I cannot be mad at that. One thing
Well,
I
thank
can do
you.
is condemn a system that has done that.
Well, thank you for being courageous enough to share such a vulnerable, situation that has, I'm sure, changed your life and your family's life. And our hearts go out to all of you. And we want to continue to unpack some of these issues, but that's just an incredibly profound and emotional start to this conversation. So, Joshua, thanks for that. Stay with us. Bella D'Alacio, I know, is with us. And Bella, I know you've also had some experiences with people that you've known who have been affected by gun violence. I want to put the same question that I put to Joshua now to you. If you could open up for us about what you've seen in your community and in your circle of friends and loved ones about the impacts of gun violence in our country.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, Joshua, thank you for sharing your story, and that was so powerful. And I'm so sorry that that happened to you. No one deserves that. But I also want to, just talk about my experience. I grew up in Broward County, Florida, the same county where the Parkland shooting happened. I lived in Parkland during elementary school, went to elementary school there. So the kids who were at the school during the time were my age, and I was a senior at the time when it happened. So Parkland was around 25 minutes away from where I moved to in the same county. So and my sister went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas when I was in elementary school as well. So it was just like Parkland was a community for me where it was a piece of my heart, my home. I did like acting classes there. I played soccer there. So I was like very involved in the community. So to see one of the deadliest mass shootings in our country happen just 20 minutes from where I grew up and 20 minutes where I previously grew up, it shook me to my core. It was like, wow, I once knew these kids. And now if I look in a yearbook, they're dead. And that was really insane to me. And so it kind of opened my eyes to the issue of gun violence in America. But sadly, as Joshua was saying, mass shootings are not the most common aspect of gun violence. The most common aspects of gun violence are suicide, domestic violence, gun violence in urban communities. And I realized, being so close to Miami, I grew up in my grandparents' house always in Miami, and they had a giant gate in front of their house to protect them from gun violence in the city. And I just thought that was incredibly interesting because when I moved to Virginia for school, I was like, no one has these giant gates. You don't have these gated communities like you do in Florida. And I'm not constantly hearing on the news every day, Florida man shot this man. Florida man has become a national joke, but it's also my reality growing up. Florida man is the man who killed my friend's mother when I was 8 years old, a man who has shot someone I've known, So just seeing young people die at the hands of, honestly, it's lawmakers' fault. I blame lawmakers. They have blood on their hands for their inefficiency in addressing these root causes of gun violence and preventative solutions. So seeing that happen when I know it could have been prevented really woke me up, I guess, to gun violence in America.
Do we have Zahir with us? Do we have Zahir Turner? Is he on the line? No, I don't think so. All right, well, we're going to come back to Zahir. So let me pose a question to you, Noah Howard. This question for you. Bella's talking about a failure of officials in government, she says, to regulate, to enact legislation that makes us safer. What say you about this? Should federal authorities, should government officials step in and start regulating in order to solve this problem?
Well, I think the biggest problem right now is not necessarily I think the biggest problem is nobody actually knows the proper measures that need to be taken into place. And that goes back to, I believe, in the 90s, whenever there were restrictions on research into gun violence. And because I've never been intimately involved with these, powerful stories related to gun violence, one of the things that I feel like is the most responsible thing I can do is rely on statistics and studies that provide me with kind of a broad picture of what is actually happening. And whenever those studies, whenever were restrictions placed on those studies, that makes it really hard to actually get a true idea of what is actually going on. And so it makes it difficult to answer the question properly, and to actually provide an answer that's adequate to that. Because if we don't understand, this is a very, very complex issue, and we can't have a single domain focus on this topic. It has to be multidisciplinary focus on an extremely complex issue in our society. And so I would say that one of the best things that we can do, and one of my favorite things, for example, that Obama did, was he opened up in 2013 after I can't remember the shooting right now, but he ordered the CDC to actually put, I believe it was a $10 million study researching into gun violence. And I think that was an important step forward. Yes, it was Sandy Hook, yeah. I believe. And so, yes. And I think that starting those steps should be a bipartisan issue. I mean, there should be, everybody can agree that having more honest and true and down-to-earth research that provides us with information to make a proper decision about how to prevent these things is the best way going forward.
Now, according to the group Everytown, which is committed to gun violence prevention, 100 Americans at least every single day are killed by guns. 200 more are shot and wounded. That's according to data from Everytown, which I believe was collected prior to the pandemic. Certainly, the restrictions on people's movement have affected those numbers, and we want to be clear about that. So, Zeb Harshberger, I've got a question for you. We were talking, Zeb, about Sandy Hook, the shooting in 2012 in December that killed such young children. Then we saw the Parkland shooting and the March for Our Lives that was unleashed after that. And the question was always, is this going to be the catalyst that finally changes things? Is this event going to be what does it? If those two events have failed to enact the kind of meaningful gun legislation that some people are calling for, what will it take to get something over the line?
I feel like in that situation, the problem was not the amount of gun legislation that was in place, but the lack of security there was in that school, or at least the lack of effective security that are hired to protect those students. In my opinion, whenever it comes to gun laws, we have been taking it too many steps forward, restricting even law-abiding citizens' ability to be able to express their Second Amendment rights. I know this as someone who is a concealed carry license holder, a gun owner, and everything like that. There are a lot of restrictions that go into purchasing a gun, but those restrictions can be overpassed by just lying or cheating or some other forms that can allow people to bypass the legal system without even trying. But obviously, those restrictions will keep law-abiding individuals from being able to express their Second Amendment rights. So I feel like
I think that's sort of the heart of the question is everybody's a law-abiding citizen until they're not. So you can't really determine if someone is a would-be shooter or a maybe would-be shooter or a could-be shooter until they've decided to pull the trigger. So I guess the better question is then, if you say we're taking things too far, how do we weed out the potential for some people to get a hold of firearms and potentially turn them on innocent people? I think that's really what a lot of activists are trying to understand. And it seems like the best way to do that in their minds, as I understand the argument, having talked to many of them in my reporting, is to reduce the number of firearms that are available to harm people with. So I would just put that back on you and say, I understand what you're saying, which is, over legislation would potentially curtail people's constitutional Second Amendment right. But the alternative to that argument is everybody is within the law until they can get their hands on a gun without having broken a law and then commit a serious or violent crime, not to mention get their hands on a weapon and then pass it to someone who couldn't get their hands on a weapon, who might use that weapon to cause, severe and widespread damage or death. So I think that's the counter argument. And I would just put that back on you to say, where do we draw the line then between what you say is too much activist legislation, too much over legislation, and then in effect doing nothing?
From there, I would repeat that we would try to go forward towards more effective forms of security, whether it would be trying to get actual qualified security guards in these schools, or if going as far as to allow, if they want to, teachers to carry in school. That's where I feel like that it would help to prevent those type of things, because you look into the psyche of someone like a school shooter, they're planning these things months in advance. So if they know who is armed, they know who is not armed, and in schools, primarily nobody is armed. So if they don't have that kind of analysis to know that somebody is armed, that can definitely put a halt on the ability for a psychologically unstable individual to go in and shoot a school. And if they do end up shooting a school, there'd be someone that is there to be able to stop them before anything gets worse.
Got it. Now, Leora, Reagan, Abigail, I want to bring all three of you into this. You've heard a diverse array of views, opinions, thoughts, the impacts of gun violence on people like Joshua and Bella. Leora, let's start with you, and then I think we'll have the same question for Reagan and Abigail. If you were in Congress today, Leora, if you were a lawmaker, I know that you're on the left. So how would you work with your right-leaning counterparts to try and find common ground and consensus? And what kind of legislative or governmental activities would you be undertaking in order to try and get a handle on gun violence in our country? What would you do to find common ground?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things to kind of emphasize, at least in the gun violence prevention work that I do, is that gun violence prevention shouldn't be a partisan problem. We are working to save people's lives. And if that becomes partisan, that's a huge problem. And so one thing that I think that I would talk to my fellow congressmen or whatever about in terms of gun violence prevention, should I be a government official, is exactly that. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about that conversation, whether it be talking about specific policies and how they can impact everyone by making them safer in a certain sense, from, for example, banning assault rifles and assault weapons. I know that those are two different things, but that's something that I'm fairly passionate about. I don't believe that there need to be those kinds of guns within the home. And for example, other things like extreme risk protection orders, making sure that people are safe in their own homes, especially during a pandemic, where for the most part, although people with mental illness are more likely to be victims of violence and survivors of violence than perpetrators, it is still, it's still incredibly likely that, should they decide to harm themselves, that relatively quickly within that impulsive decision, they have the ability to carry that out, especially with a firearm where that's not reversible. And so I think those are two of the things that I would bring up first, although there's quite a lot on my list that I would definitely bring up.
Reagan, let me bring you in on this. I'm going to give the same question to you and then to Abigail. If you were in Congress right now and you had the power of making and legislating different kinds of laws and statutes, what would you do about this? And how would you work with people on the opposite side of the aisle from where you sit to find some consensus?
Yeah, so first of all, I would definitely consider myself a leftist. I would ride on that area. But I think as someone who grew up in Southern Kentucky where guns are fairly common, I know that a lot of gun owners are simply uneducated. They don't know how to manage their weapons. They don't know how to protect and safely guard their weapons, which you see a lot of issues, especially in the news. You feel like every time there's a shooting, if you look into where the gunman has gotten the weapon from, it's often from someone in the home, which there are ways that you can help prevent that. So I think my first thing would be, obviously the current gun restrictions, whether you believe they're too much or not enough, aren't working. So where the places that we put gun restriction, it's obviously not helping. So we have to focus on other areas and start working on laws that we can put in place there. Because obviously banning the type of weapons or parts that modify weapons isn't working. So maybe we should look at the security of a weapon or who can obtain a weapon, or the fact that someone my age can go to a gun show and purchase a weapon. I've seen it before. The fact that you can walk into a living room of almost anyone I've ever known and they'll have a plain wooden gun cabinet there that you can just open. No locks, nothing. That's obviously an issue in itself. So I think tackling those issues first and then worrying about everything else would be incredibly important.
And Abigail, you've been patient, but we've been really eager to hear from you. And I'm sorry we haven't gotten to you sooner. But I want to ask the same question of you. How are we going to find common ground on this? What do you think?
Well, I definitely think that having safer, like teaching gun owners how to properly use and store their weapons is very important. And I think that doing background checks is another really important thing. Making sure someone is in a good mental state to own a weapon and knows the proper procedures and how to use it. And I think another thing is, in terms of school shootings, taking every threat as a credible threat, which I think is done more so now than it was a while ago. But I think it's very important that we take every threat as something that could be probable and could happen.
Yeah, well, I want to share some data about those threats and how they have unfolded in just really shocking numbers. According to the Gun Violence Archive, it's a group that tracks gun violence, mass shootings, and deaths in America. Last year, there were 417 mass shootings, and 31 of them qualified as mass murders, which I believe is, if it results in, at least 4 people are shot, that's a mass shooting, and a mass murder is in which more than 4 people are killed. So 31 of those were qualified as mass murders. And I apologize for those viewers who are listening. I know that these are rather macabre numbers. This year, as of October the 13th, according to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 33,489 deaths as a result of gun violence. So, I think that paints a pretty grim picture. And there have been thus far 497 mass shootings, which actually I think is higher than the numbers that I quoted for 2019, even though we have been in lockdown, of which 16 of them have qualified as mass murders. So, clearly this is a serious problem. Now, we've got a lot of people who are on the line right now, and I know that we are not exactly pressed for time, but given that we have multiple really talented and bright thinkers and robust and powerful voices in all of you, and it's been such a delight to hear your thoughts on this at an important time in our country. I want to give each of you a chance. Let's say, given that there are there are 7 of you, let's say 60 to 90 seconds max, so that we can try and do this in the next 8 to 10 minutes and get through everybody. On simple question, and I don't know if you can all see in the same configuration that I can, but we're going to go clockwise, starting from the bottom. We'll start with Abigail, and presuming you can all see in the same order, we'll finish with Josh. In a couple of weeks, our country has a big decision to make. It's going to be the 2020 general election. We will be deciding on who the next president will be, and whoever that person is going to be is going to continue to lead the national discourse and dialogue about responding to these kinds of events, and potentially will wield the power to finally do something or not about mass shootings in our country. So I want to give each of you a chance to tell our audience who your candidate is, if you're comfortable sharing that, though I understand if you're not, and that's fine. But I think in order to answer this question, you might find that you have to, and why that person has got it right on gun violence prevention in our country. So who are you supporting, if you're willing to share, and why they get it right? And if you are not willing to share, not comfortable sharing, which I completely understand, then the question I would posit to you is, what would be one thing we can do within the next year, say 2021, to have a safer, more harmonious country pertaining to gun violence? So either who you're supporting and why they're right, or if you don't want to share, one thing we can do. So Abigail, let's start with you.
Okay, so I'm going to go with one thing we can do in the next year. And something that I've seen in my own community that has helped with violence and gun violence specifically has been having after-school programming for students at schools so that there's less time, so that they feel connected to their community. I work with an organization called After School Matters, and we do art and different types of projects and career building activities that gives students a brighter future. And there's monetary stipends involved, which gives people financial stability as well. And I think that that definitely helps with gun violence and taking people out of desperate situations.
Thanks, Abigail. Good answer. Now, again, I hope everybody's in the same order as I am, but Zeb, you're up next.
For this election, I decided to vote for Donald Trump in the election, and it wasn't because of having a good record, in my opinion, on guns. In my opinion, he can do so much better on protecting individual gun rights. For me, it's because of what I would presume to be a very bad record upcoming a Biden-Harris administration. Kamala Harris has stated that she intends to confiscate approximately 3 million guns around America, even though there are more guns in circulation than there are people living in America. So I feel that if Biden and Harris were to win the presidency, then there would be more laws put into place without there being any effective way to solve the issue of gun violence.
Mm-hmm. Noah, you're up next.
I am torn on the issue of who to vote for. I think it's going to eventually have to be something like a regrettably Trump kind of decision. And my reasoning for that is that I feel like my reasoning for that isn't so much related to gun violence, because I believe that there's a broader issue that gun violence kind of is encapsulated that we kind of forget to talk about. And I think that has to do with crime itself. Because if you compare statistics between other countries, when you look at just gun violence, you see that it would seem that America does have a severe gun violence issue. But we forget about that idea, and that kind of framing is that America is one of the only countries that has as lax gun regulations as we do. And if you actually look at crime data, you find that America is well within the range of normalcy. I mean, in intentional homicides, America ranks, I think it's 95th on the world spectrum. So I think what we're doing here is we may be tightening our focus to where we're looking at something that is a tool used for violence rather than focusing on the violence itself. And so to that end, I feel like what Trump will do is that I feel like he will be focusing on preventing crime without increasing gun restrictions, which may or may not inadvertently affect lawful gun owners.
Thank you. And I just want to remind people, if you're just joining us, I probably should have done this earlier, but you are watching a live panel from the Conversationalist where we're exploring gun violence prevention and the question of whether we should legislate more aggressively or not here in this country in order to reconcile with the situation we face, in which we do have by all accounts, a real issue with gun violence in the U.S. And this is an election year, so a chance to potentially do something about it. And we are polling our group of remarkable young voices on this subject. So I want to bring you in next, Leora. A reminder of our question for those viewers just joining us. Either share with us whom you're voting for and why you think they've got it right on gun violence, or something that you think we can do within the next year to try and move us closer to the goal that you personally would have for where we need to be on this.
Yeah, I am personally voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I have done extensive research on Joe Biden's website and other campaign websites to see different kinds of gun violence prevention policies that they have put forward, and compared to President Trump, I feel that Joe Biden is going to take us in a better and safer direction. But to kind of go off of that topic just a little bit, I think it's especially important also while we're in the middle of a presidential election season to also be talking about down ballot races. I know that people are voting for senators and representatives and local positions. And in terms of gun violence, those are just as important, if not more important, than the presidential election, because that's ultimately where we see the most change happening, is on the local level. And I work with an organization called Not My Generation that does exactly that, looking at the root issues of gun violence in these different communities that we work with and trying to come up with solutions there. So while we're talking about a presidential election, I encourage also all of you to go look at your down ballot races and see who holds the values and the policies that you would like to see in terms of gun violence prevention.
Bella D'Alacio, why don't you jump in next?
Yeah, just kind of reiterate what Leora said. I will also be voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I know that Joe Biden has a great track record when it comes to gun violence prevention. During Obama, he's narrowed the gun show loophole and increased background checks. And on his campaign website, like, he's pledged to repeal PLACA and expand universal background checks, close the Charleston and boyfriend loophole, different things like that. So these are incredibly important preventative solutions. And just like she said about the down ballot candidates, it's so important to also vote for the senators. Right now, universal background checks have passed in the House for over a year, and it's up to the Senate to decide. And it's been in the Senate for over a year. This is critical life-saving legislation that needs to pass, and so it's more than a presidential election for sure.
Yeah, I do think that's a good point that you both brought up. Reagan, why don't you jump in on this? Do we have you? Now I can hear you. You're back with us. Welcome back.
Okay, well, I'm 15, so I have a little while. But if I was able to vote this election, I would be voting for Biden and Harris. There are a lot of reasons why I support their campaign, but universal background checks are something that's very important to me. And a lot of people that are working with Biden very closely also will help steer him in the right direction on gun violence and preventative actions that we can make. So if I could vote, that was who I would be voting for. And also, kind of going back on what Bella and Leora said, I live in Kentucky. Mitch McConnell and Amy McGrath, that's a major election for us right now. To me, that's kind of where my focus has been because, but I think that voting in your state and making sure that you have people in your state that believe in what you believe in and are there to help support states' rights and can help enable policies even closer to home are really important. So please go vote for the people that can't.
Reagan, just tell us quickly what the energy is like around that contentious senatorial race you were talking about. What's it like on the ground in your state right now? Because the country is definitely aware of this.
Yeah, it is a crazy environment. Just about everywhere you go, there are, we have a street that we call the McGrath Street right now there's an Amy McGrath sign at every single house. And then on the opposite side, there's a McConnell sign on every single house. It's definitely every single ad you get, every single ad you see on TV, on websites, YouTube. It's constant bickering, constant going back and forth. But you also see a lot of even very far right Republicans just ready to get Mitch out, and he's been in there for a while. You see a lot of people starting to get tired of him and the lack of work that he's put in. And I think that I have a lot of faith in McGrath. I've met her a few times. She's an incredible woman, and I'm working with her campaign. So I really hope that she can pull out a win for Kentucky because we really need it.
Zaire, I'm glad you could join us. I'm sorry we didn't get to hear more from you over the course of the discussion, but I know that, Wi-Fi woes are sort of ubiquitous during the course of this pandemic. I've been there many times myself, but I'm hoping that we've got you back now, Zaire, and I think you are aware of the questions. So why don't you jump in, and fingers crossed that we'll get to hear your perspective. Have we got you there? I think you may be muted. All right. Zaire, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Yeah, no, we're still. Zaire, I'm sorry, my friend. We're just having a tough time.
What was that?
Can you hear us now, Zaire?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, so there's a delay, but at least we've got your audio. So why don't you tell us either whom you're voting for and why you support them on gun violence, or something we can do in the next year to figure this out?
I'm sorry, I missed that last one. It was a little bit shaky again.
It's okay. It's either whom you're supporting in this election and why they're the right
last question.
Uh-oh, yeah. We'll give it one more shot. I know there's a significant delay. Who you're voting for, if you're comfortable sharing, and why you support them on gun violence prevention, or one thing that we can do in the next year as a country to have a safer, more harmonious country on the subject of gun violence. What would you say?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, which is great news.
Okay, so can you guys hear me fine?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think I'm going to be. Okay, so I think as of this election, I'm going to be voting for Donald Trump because I have more of my values lining with the right than the left. And in terms of gun violence, I believe that a big step into preventing gun violence would be annual
Zaire, I'm sorry. I just don't think it's working out. I'm really sorry about this. I know we got the first part of your answer, which I think was supporting Donald Trump, but the Wi-Fi is just too tough. I'm so sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Were you guys, anyone else on the call, able to hear clearly? Was it just me, or are you guys also experiencing the same? Okay. All right, Zaire, I'm really sorry about this, but I just think the signal is not working out, and it's a little bit faint. So I do apologize, and we wish we could hear from Zaire and hope to hear from him again in the future. But, this happens, and this is the world we live in. So Joshua, I'm going to yield the floor to you. You started us off on such a powerful and moving note, and we were so sorry to hear about what happened to your family. But if you can take us out as we wrap up this conversation, that'd be good.
Yes, most definitely. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So for me, I will be supporting Biden and Harris. I've had the pleasure of meeting both of them back when I was with Every Town a Man's Asked for Gun Safety. And overall, I believe they have a more comprehensive understanding of what it takes to fix the gun violence issue. Not only that, but even within this conversation, I kind of noticed it, but gun violence is being talked about from a different lens than what I'm talking about, if that makes any sense. So for me, it's not an issue of people using legal guns to kill people. It's illegal guns that kill people in my community. The laws that impact us the most negative when it comes down to gun violence, when it comes down to federal laws that have been passed, are things such as PLACA, that was passed underneath of the Bush administration that eliminated any liability of any major gun manufacturers to be able to address the gun violence issue. Eliminated all liability for them. And as a result, we saw an increase in terms of fluctuation of black market guns entering black communities. And again, the root cause of gun violence within my community are far different from those that impact other communities here. You can't talk about gun violence without looking at the intersection between gun violence and racism. Gun violence is a race issue. Although black people make up 13% of the population, we make up the bulk majority of all gun violence homicides that happen each and every year. The majority of the gun violence that happens inside of communities like mine only happen in 2% of the real estate within the entire country. But when we talk about gun violence in conversations like these and outside of these, we oftentimes focus on the irresponsible gun owner that locks up their weapon, but we don't talk about how education and the poor quality of education inside our communities beats down black people and pushes them into circumstances where they're most likely to become either a victim or perpetrator of violence themselves in order to survive. Mm-hmm. So for me, I can't openly, push and advocate for a Trump administration that has shown little to no regard for the life of black people. So for me, it's more of, yes, I'm voting for Biden and I'm voting for Kamala, but best believe I'm going to hold them accountable for any shortcomings that they have as well. Because within the U.S., even inside a conversation where we're talking about gun violence, black people are always the afterthought. We don't initially think of gun violence as a black brother, a black sister being gunned down in the community. In Baltimore City, just last year, we had over 349 homicides, but a single flag was not lowered for our black brothers and sisters that have been killed. And all of them, with the exception of maybe 10 or 20, were black people. All of them were. But when we have other shootings happen, mass shootings happen, it's highlighted and flags are raised. The mass shooting that happened at HBCU just last year, no one talked about it. I didn't see a single post. I didn't see a single flag being lowered or any of that. Nothing happened. Because when things happen to black people in this country, for me, it's viewed as though it's not important. And not only that, but just to address something that was also previously stated, we cannot only, seek to just look at, the numbers for the U.S. when you look at it per capita, it's actually better than a lot of other countries. I'll give you that. But when you look at it specific for individual ethnic groups, what's happening to black people in this country is beyond atrocious. There's no good way to look at the numbers when in reality, the disproportionate effect falls on people that look like me. It falls on people that look like my brother, my sister, my cousin, my best friend. It falls on people like that. It falls on us. The impact of crime and violence falls on us, because when it comes down to economic scarcity is what it seeks to address. And when scarcity isn't addressed, people will tear each other apart to survive off of minimal resources. So what that means is that going forward, we can not only seek to prevent gun violence into the taking away this. Yes,
we're having some of those same.
Also,
yeah, you know what? Unfortunately, we're just running into Wi-Fi difficulties again. But I would say, on the whole, Joshua, I think we had the benefit of hearing most of what you had to say, and I know that it's elicited some strong reactions among the group. And I'm so sorry, but I think we've kind of lost your audio. But that is a decent place where we can conclude this conversation tonight on those powerful remarks and on all of your powerful remarks. The thing is, we could continue this conversation indefinitely. This is a conversation that affects people all across our country. Yes, indeed, around the world, but certainly here in the U.S. And young people are directly affected by it. This has affected their families and has affected the kind of country that Gen Z will inherit. So it's been really inspiring to hear what all of you have had to say. And I'm sorry for the technical difficulties that we had at the end with Joshua and with Zaire, but I think on the whole, this was just a remarkable discussion. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I can confidently say that no matter what side of the aisle you may be on, I feel very optimistic about the future of our country, knowing that you guys will be the leaders that get to call the shots in the future. So thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. Sophie, you want to join us again? I think you're muted, Sophie.
Thank you all so much. This conversation has been incredible. And as I know we mentioned, there's no way that we can even cover half of what we needed to tonight in such a short amount of time. So if there's still, some pieces left on your mind that you want to continue speaking about, please know that the conversation does not end here. We tried to go around the room, but I'm sure you all have so much more to say from all of your vast experiences and perspectives. So please join us in our community for our after party, where we're going to go in depth and hopefully talk about, other aspects of the gun violence discussion that we weren't able to get to tonight. So thank you all so much for being here. I personally learned so much from each of you, and really just looking forward to where our country is headed, where amazing young people like all of you and amazing Gen Z changemakers from our generation will be leading the force. So thank you all so much. And we're excited for all that's to come. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to head into our Q&A with Reed. Thank you all so much. We have to say goodbye to our panelists and our featured panelist, Zeb's dog. But we look forward to the next time we get to see all of your faces at TC. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.
Guys. Thanks so much for doing this and for being so brave to share with us, what they honestly think, Sophie. I've got to say, what an honor for the two of us to have been able to work with such a remarkable group of young people, and particularly for me to be the moderator of a panel where we had such a diverse spectrum of views that were all backed up by really intelligent and logical thinking, and young people that have clearly thought through these issues and done their homework. I mean, what a great group of people who are going to be the leaders for tomorrow. I have to say it again.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. That conversation definitely left me feeling hopeful that we can actually come together across the aisle and talk about these difficult issues from multiple points of view. I will say I'm really sad that we didn't get to hear from Zaire tonight. I was talking to him. He was running across town to try to log on to different Wi-Fi hotspots.
It's tough.
We're going to have him back.
It always happens to somebody, and it's happened to me on other events and panels that I've either moderated or participated in over the course of these 7 months now that we've been doing the virtual thing. But I hope that we get to hear from Zaire on a future event, and it happens, but we appreciate his efforts that he made to try and be a part of this.
Me too. And I'm really looking forward to the next piece of our event tonight. So for anyone who's still here, see so many awesome people in the chat. Hey, Valerie. Hey, Laura, Gavin, Taylor, Rena, Jennifer, thank you all so much for being here. If you have questions for Reed about anything from his career on iCarly to his career now as a journalist and anything in between, now is your chance to ask some questions. So pop over. We'll get to as many as we can. But Reed, I want to start with a question. Obviously, we just heard so many awesome opinions and perspectives around the gun violence issue. I'd like to hear, what tonight helped to break open your echo chamber, and maybe had you think about something you hadn't previously considered before about gun violence?
That's interesting. I think the big takeaway for me, first of all, as a journalist, it's my job to put aside any personal biases that I have to the best of my ability, because you can argue that it's impossible for anyone to really put aside every personal bias, because bias is not just prejudice, but it's like the way that we see the world, the way that we're human to see the world. But it's my job to leave those things at the door and really have an open mind and be a facilitator for people so that they can hear from the more interesting people, more interesting than me, who are those panelists, and all of their views. And I think the big takeaway for me is, in a time when we as journalists have been, I think, disheartened by the, really aggressive, polarized discourse that has gripped the nation, it is amazing to see that these young people, who in some cases have different perspectives, are able to converse with each other. And that's sort of been the unsung, theme of the last 4 years, has been trying to get people to listen to each other and talk to each other in spite of the very high tensions we have in this country. But we have yet to get to a point where those young people that we just heard from are of age where they can run for office and vote. And they can vote, but run for office and serve in government. And what I'm just looking forward to is the chance to see them on a debate stage one day, because I think they're going to be incredibly civil and respectful. And my big takeaway from tonight and what I learned is, yes, you can see perhaps not eye to eye with people, but you can think in a way that moves the conversation in a productive direction. So that was great to see.
So beautifully said, and I could not agree more. You should see our debate watch parties that we have in the community where we live chat during the presidential and the vice presidential debates. It really just gives me hope that our generation is going to be the one to lead us into the future in a more civil way. So said so beautifully. And Reed, we have some awesome questions coming in. But lastly, before I start taking audience questions, I know this firsthand because I've seen you in action leading panels all around the country in New York City. And I had the privilege to go to a panel that you helped facilitate at Columbia Journalism School, all about the aftermath of the Parkland shooting and what you've learned about gun violence and also the intersection of gun violence and mental health. And I'd love to share, I'd love to know, is there anything that we didn't cover tonight that you've seen in your expertise of the gun violence prevention space that you would have liked to hear us and see us talk about during tonight's conversation?
For sure. What I would say is this, I always approach this from the perspective of dialogue, discourse, and reporting. And in your case, you put together this phenomenal panel discussion, and we heard about an array of political thinking around this. What I would ask all of those panelists, if we had more time, are two things. One, the panel you're talking about that I hosted at Columbia was on the ethics of reporting and trauma, how journalists go into communities and how we report on situations that happen where people are, put in all kinds of terrible situations. And the reason we do that is to inform and to advance the discussion and to serve those communities by shining a light on what happens to them. But, very often a lot of reporters get a bad rap for that kind of work. And I would have loved to have had the chance to ask those young people, what do you think about the interaction between, the media, the press, and these communities, and how we can continue to do a better job of covering them? Because I think part of our job as journalists is to consult a variety of viewpoints, including young people like the ones we just heard from, and Joshua and Bella have obviously been affected directly by gun violence, so wanted to hear from them on that. And the other thing that I would say that I would love to ask them is about student activist movements. The March for Our Lives is such a fascinating movement to me because it was driven by young people. And it was able to get some incremental legislation passed. I think there was like a ban on bump stocks, which you can attach to semi-automatic weapons to get them to fire faster and to be able to fire more rounds. You can't get that anymore. And I think that the March for Our Lives is a demonstration that young people do have enormous power to unify and use their voice. But we didn't really see any landmark federal legislation come out of that. Like, it didn't, ban the sale of semi-automatic weapons. You can still get an AR-15, which is the rifle that was used there. And I would ask them, what do you think either went wrong or what could have been done better in those student movements? Because these are the young people who are going to be leading the kind of activist movements that will drive change in our country in the future. So why didn't that do everything that it set out to do? Because the goal of that movement, and I think there was a while there where we really thought it was going to work because it was like an unstoppable movement, was to really change things at a federal legislative level. So, that would be another thing to ask for the future.
We could have a whole other panel on that discussion, which I hope we can have at some point. But Reed, on behalf of all of TC, thank you so much for being our moderator tonight. There were people popping in the chat saying that you really are such a natural conversationalist, and I'm just in awe of the way that you were able to facilitate that discussion. So first of all, thank you. We're so grateful to have you here and would love to talk a little bit about your career in journalism. I'm going to start taking questions from the audience. So Andy wants to know, how did you get started in journalism?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Andrea. So when I was on iCarly and around the age when I was 15, I was traveling overseas a lot. I was watching overseas news channels in hotels like BBC World News and CNN International. And I knew that I wanted to cover news. And the stories that I saw in the news about how people think and how they act and world events that happen elsewhere, it was just incredibly fascinating to me. And I was a self-professed news junkie. I even have a t-shirt in my bedroom that I got at the museum in Washington, D.C. I think I have two of them, actually, that says news junkie. I knew from the time I was a teenager that I wanted to be telling stories. So when I went to college at NYU undergrad back in 2013, when I was a freshman, I decided to study journalism. And I figured, if it doesn't work out, then I can always switch majors and go and do film or something else. And, things that were more along the line of what I had previously done. But I fell in love with journalism. I mean, I was bitten by the bug. What can I say? It was love at first sight. As soon as I was able to go out there and find sources and tell stories and find out information for the benefit of the public and public knowledge. And it's a real rush to me. So I stuck with it. And then I moved to Hong Kong in 2016, so 4 years ago, and was working at CNN there as a reporter and digital writer. And then I left Hong Kong, moved back to New York, where I joined MarketWatch, which is the Wall Street Journal digital network. And I was a reporter there. And then after MarketWatch, I went to become editor. Now I'm like giving you my CV. I apologize.
Love it.
But this is how I'm just saying all this because I want you to know how I came to covering gun violence. I took over the reins of a publication covering mental health in our country. And that's when I got to know a lot of the activists in Parkland. I was covering trauma in that community and, recovery a year later, 2 years later, because when the shooting happened, I was at MarketWatch and I did cover it there. But then I stayed with the story in my next journalism job. And then I went to graduate school, and that's something you're well aware of, Sophie. I went to Columbia University for my master's in journalism, graduated earlier this year, and then joined Business Insider, where now I mainly cover business, which is what I covered at the Wall Street Journal digital network. But within the world of business, which is a big beat, I cover, finance. I cover Wall Street. I cover investment banks, and I cover asset managers, and the people that make the decisions that impact capital markets and investments that affect all of our day-to-day lives. So it's really it's a wonderful profession, and it's an endless pathway to learning and exploration. I mean, sometimes it amazes me that we as a human race came up with a profession where literally it's your job every single day to immerse yourself in conversations with fascinating people and seek out information for the benefit of others. It's really a privilege. So that's how I came to this.
Amazing. And you already answered Gisella's question. So I'll move on to the next. Gavin wants to know, and of course, we're going to touch on some iCarly magic tonight. But thinking back on your journey on the show, to what extent do you feel like you relate to Nevel Papperman?
Yeah, I would say hopefully not a lot, because he was not a very friendly individual. No, I think Nevel was someone who was a writer and a blogger, right? He had his website, nevelocity.com. So we can probably relate to each other on that level. I'm a digital writer and I write for, readers on the internet. So, there's that. But I think honestly, the way to answer that question is, I don't know how much I ran into similarities between myself and Nevel, but I would say that the skills I learned in television were integral for what I do now, because the experiences I had as an actor on iCarly, traveling and interacting with reporters and interacting with viewers and having conversations with people and being comfortable in front of a camera served me every day as a journalist. So it's actually pretty good training if you're someone who wants to pursue a career in what I do now.
I was going to say, that is such a good answer. I didn't even put the two together with nevelocity.com.
He was a writer. I mean, he was there first, right? He was all over this industry before I was.
As Catherine said, Nevel really did take over the world. I could not agree more. And Alexandra wants to know, will you ever go back to acting?
I mean, I never say never, but I will say it's very doubtful, to be honest. I think, as Sophie, you well know, because you and I are best of friends outside of here, and we talk about certainly all my career ambitions. I would love to try my hand at maybe writing a sitcom, doing something behind the scenes, producing, writing, developing, script development. I have a couple of ideas in my head for sitcoms that maybe one day I'll be lucky enough to get to write and then hand off to a team of producers and network executives and let them bring it to life. But I think, to be quite honest, my future is as a journalist, and I don't see that ever changing. So maybe a cameo somewhere, maybe an appearance, in the background. But I think it's pretty safe to say that I will not be, doing the acting circuit again as much as I do it.
I know that's disappointing to some, but I'm such a believer that the world is better for it, having your journalistic expertise. You are just a fantastic journalist in every way, shape, and form. And I'd love to know, ending out our Q&A tonight, because I know, it's been a wonderful discussion. I wanted to end with one question about the Conversationalist. You know our brand better than most. We're all about amplifying Gen Z voices and having difficult conversations. Do you have any advice for any young people out there around discovering and finding their voice and navigating difficult conversations with the people around them?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, I do. and it may not be what people had in mind, but it's the really practical advice that I wish someone had told me, which is you really need to find one person willing to listen to you. Because as someone who's trying to find your voice, eventually you want to be able to move to the point where you're comfortable sharing your thoughts in a cogent, respectful way with broader communities. Because if you're someone who wants to share your voice, in order to share your voice, you have to have people be able to hear it. So my advice to people is, in order to get comfortable with anything, take incremental steps. And if you're someone who is nervous about speaking up in class or speaking up on Zoom rooms or sharing your innermost thoughts, like we saw our young panelists do tonight about gun violence or about the election, heated topics, find one friend you can trust and take time to really develop that relationship of trust with that person. And maybe they're the only person for this whole year that you feel comfortable being honest and having deep conversations with. And maybe next year it's 2 people, and maybe the year after that it's 5. But you got to start somewhere, and you're not going to go from A to Z overnight. And I think what's amazing about The Conversationalist is it's taught us that it's okay to have a diversity of thought and a diversity of opinion. So it's a really good way to try and develop your conversational skills, your debate skills, to find one friend, one loved one family member, one mentor that you can have that open bond with. And I think that will help people to understand that a lot of our fears are based in the idea of rejection. And if you have one person who's there, who's willing to listen to you and respect what you think, that can go a long way in diminishing the fear of rejection. So for those people searching for their voice, find that one person to be your anchor to share it with. And then hopefully later on, whether it's a month, a year, or 10 years from now, you will find that proverbial megaphone and share your voice with all of us. Because I can tell you, we are eager to hear it, and we are eager to listen, and we're eager to talk back. So that would be the advice that I would share.
Oh my gosh, Reed, mic drop. I'm speechless. We've got some people saying Reed for president. Alexandra, I agree. Wow.
Very nice of you. Well, you've got a wonderful community here. And I just want to take a moment to say that I respect your work ethic and I respect your creativity so much. And I respect that you are using your talent, Sophie, to do so much good and to foster conversation and inspire other people to go out in their communities and spread positive messages. I mean, this is a really integral platform at an integral moment in our history. And I think this platform is going to continue growing. It's seen unbelievable growth. Listen, I said it at the start. I was there on day one, literally. I actually was with you. And I've seen it a year later and how it's grown to thousands and thousands. I think you shattered 10,000 people. So imagine next year how it's going to continue to grow exponentially. And I'm excited to be along for the ride with everybody here tonight, and everyone here will join. So thank you so much for including me in this. And thanks for what you're doing for our community here.
Thank you so much. I'm getting emotional. That means the world to me. And Reed, I just want to close out by saying that the advice that you gave tonight about finding just one person that you can confide in, I hope that you know that for me, you are that person. I feel so lucky to have you in my life. Every conversation we have is better than the last. And I just hope that anyone listening takes that away from tonight. It's as simple as just finding one person to talk to discover your own voice, and then continue from there. So Reed, thank you so much for being a part of The Conversationalist, literally since day one. And I can't wait for the next time we have you on the TC stage.
Thanks, my friend. Have a great evening. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Reed. Oh my goodness. Wow. Reed Alexander, everyone. I just feel so humbled and honored. Reed is truly one of my best friends in the world, and you can see it. He is just a natural conversationalist, and I feel so lucky to have had him here tonight with our 8 incredible panelists to have the important discussion around gun violence in 2020. So thank you all so much for being here, and if you want to continue the conversation, please join our community. We are there waiting for you to have a meaningful dialogue about any topic under the sun, ranging from gun violence prevention all the way up to mental health, pop culture, coronavirus, and everything in between. So right now, if you want to join our community, it's so simple. Just text this word to this number, and we'll be there to greet you and welcome you with open arms. So thank you so much again to our incredible panelists this evening. I feel so lucky to have been here for this dialogue, and I'm so hopeful about where we're headed. And I'm excited to continue the conversation in our after party. So we'll see you in our community, and make sure that you're connected with us on social media at The Conversationalist, as we're going to be announcing our next celebrity guest host for our next panel tomorrow on social media. So make sure that you're there. We can't wait for all that's to come. And thank you again to everyone for being a part of our journey to unify the world. I'm Sophie Barron. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you again to Reed and our